The Ketchikan area is loaded with many photography opportunities. Plus, I found the people to be very generous. This is episode 151 of the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast for September 2, 2022. Hello and welcome to the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast. I am your host, Brent Bergherm, and I am thrilled to have you here. I'm all about helping you pursue your photographic purpose in the great outdoors. Many of you have been here for a good long time, listening to many shows, and this is just another wonderful experience into the great outdoors. I'm so glad you're here. I really do appreciate your being here. And for everyone who's new, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Do check out the back catalog. We've got lots of great content back there to feast your ears on, to learn a little bit, maybe, of course, be inspired a lot of bit to get out there and shoot more pictures. Please do feel free to reach out. I love to hear from you listeners. Whether you're in the Facebook group, now that is the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast Facebook group, you do need to ask to join that group if you're not a member already. Feel free to find us there if you'd like, and you can always ask questions there. Contact me through that. You can also just email me, brent@thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com. So this episode is pretty much all about the actual trip. It's my trip report to the Ketchikan area. I went in the beginning of August, and it's been a little while. Here we are in the beginning of September already. I've been spending a lot of time. I finally made a decision. I need to just get this thing whipped into shape and get out there. And what I'm talking about is the Great Outdoors Photography School. So you might recall about a little over a year ago, I opened the Latitude Photography School. It was based off the name and branding of the podcast at the time. And I have switched that branding, of course, to the Great Outdoors Photography. And so now we have the Great Outdoors Photography School. I had closed it for a while as far as allowing new people in because I wanted to retool a few things in the back end and just kind of reassess my efforts there and make sure things are in tip-top shape. And, well, we finally have reached tip-top shape. So the very first link in your podcast app, whichever app you're listening to, as you look at the show notes, you're going to see a link there. The very first link is something that you can click on to learn a little bit more about the Great Outdoors Photography School. This is a great opportunity to dig deep and find greater meaning and purpose in your photography. I just love helping people do this. I hope that's what we do here on the podcast, of course. We dig deep into understanding the wonderful beauty of the places we're going, the places we're talking about, and of course the people that we're talking with. When we have an interview, there's just so much wonderful things we can do to be inspired and to learn from other people. But there's nothing like getting out there and learning it yourself, experiencing it for yourself. And I know for me, that is definitely, usually anyway, something that I know I have a problem with, and that is just getting out there and shooting, because there's so many responsibilities in life. There's so many things that, dare I say, get in our way. And to have some type of regular program that helps you consistently just keep pushing forward in your photography, it's just good stuff. How else can I put it? And that's what the Great Outdoors Photography School is all about, to help you tap into your unique vision. And if you don't know, if you're not sure what that vision is, then let's help you find it. Let's help you explore. Let's help you contemplate and consider what that means for your photography. And that is something I would love to be able to help you to do. This is definitely not a program that's for everyone. I do not work with, or I should say, I stay away from politically charged topics, formal portraits, wedding, alcohol, tobacco, and related items, and possibly other topics there as well. So there's possibly a whole slew. I just don't want to get into everything, but these are the main items. And this is only for the nature of really the training, because formal portraits and those kinds of things, that might be something I do with my students here at the university. But as it relates to what we're doing in the Great Outdoors Photography School, this is something where we want to focus on travel and culture, landscape, macro photography, street photography, documentary and storytelling, and certainly fine art and abstracts. If you work in those genres or a single of those genres, then this program is for you. I do have a special code just for you, the listener of this podcast. If you use the coupon code LISTENER, that's LISTENER, and if you use it by October 7, 2022, that is going to be good for 1 week of access, full access to the site for $1. Now, you can cancel at any time, but if you continue on after that first week, it will start charging you the regular rate, and you'll go forward with the regular monthly rate. But if you'd like to just test it out and see what it's like, I invite you to head on over to that link. It's right there in your podcast player. It'll take you to my website, which is brentbergherm.com/photo-school. And you'll be able to learn all about it and sign up there. But use that coupon code LISTENER for 1 week for $1, 1 week of access for $1. And one of the special things, I guess, that's you could really take advantage of, the timing is just perfect for you, because we have coming up on the 8th of September, we have coming up a live session. And that's one of the best features of this program. We have 4 live sessions per quarter. And so September 8th is scheduled to be our next live session, 6 p.m. Pacific time. And you can get all of the information there in the website. Now, what do we do during a live session? A live session is all about your questions and your ideas and your thoughts and struggles, whatever the case is. We answer those questions. Maybe it's just an image review that you want. Maybe it's feedback from this thought or idea, or you are thinking of doing a different technique or something like that, and you just want some feedback. That's what these live sessions are about. I also, in my last live session, handed out my first assignment. And so we actually have an assignment that the members are working on, and then we're going to come back together into this live session, and we'll discuss the results of that assignment. So if these types of things are interesting to you, and certainly I hope so they are, then certainly check it out. Contact me. Let me know if you've got any questions. I definitely want to do what I can to help you understand and make sure that this is the right program for you. So that's the Great Outdoors Photography School, and it's all hosted there on my website, brentbergherm.com. And if you want to just click there to the website, I've got a little item there, a little menu item there. It has my little hat next to it. It says the school, or you can just go brentbergherm.com/photo-school, photo-school, whichever you wish to call that little dash between the word photo and the word school. Okay, let us get on to our main topic here, which is my fly-in camping. Boy, howdy. What a trip. I've got some great show notes, a great show notes blog, whatever you want to call it, here on my website, where I basically just wrote everything out, and I'm going to be effectively be using that as my inspiration for what I talk about. But certainly there might be some things that I write out that I don't cover specifically here, and there might be some things I cover here that are not written there on the blog. But I just wanted to, I guess, start off by saying this was a very interesting trip. If I were to summarize it, hindsight being 2020, it was a great trip. There was a lot of wonderful things, and that's really what you expect me to say too, isn't it? It was a challenging trip. I made a couple of assumptions, or made a few mistakes is probably the better way to put it, that caused me to suffer a little bit too. But it was the generosity of one particular individual that we'll learn about that really saved the day, really made it a much easier experience, I guess, a much more pleasant experience, because of a few things that I just like, oh, what an idiot. And let's just get started here. So it started on Sunday. And this was, what day was that? Sunday, July 31 is actually when I left. And so the day started before 3:30 because the flight schedules out of Walla Walla. You have a flight at 5:30, and then you have another flight at like 2:30 or something like that. And that's it. They have 2 flights a day, and they only go to Seattle. And then right now, during this time frame, there's actually only 1 flight a day. That's really frustrating. They claim it's to switch out some aircraft. Alaska Airlines is retiring the Q400, and they're going to the CRJ-175s, I think it is, which is a jet aircraft. Which, I mean, fine. They seat the same amount of people. As far as us here in Walla Walla area, it just doesn't matter one bit, really. But it's probably also something to do with staffing, because all of the airlines are having some staffing issues, and certainly there's probably that idea involved as well. So anyway, I got to the airport at about 4:15 in the morning for my 5:30 a.m. flight. Now, a lot of times the airlines are going to tell you, get there 2 hours ahead of time. In Walla Walla, if you don't have a checked bag, you can get there a half hour ahead of time, and you might just barely make it, but at least you still made it. Well, I'm the kind of guy who does like to arrive a little bit early. I like to plan for some buffer time. I like to plan for just those problems that are possibly going to happen that you most definitely hope don't happen. But that's why I showed up early. Plus, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to have a lot of gear, and I just don't know how they're going to, respect my TSA pre-check or not, which they very much did. So I didn't have to unload my gear at all from my carry-on bags. Didn't have to take off my big hiking boots that I was wearing. And that was great. I loved that little bit of extra flexibility for sure. So I got to the counter here at 4:15 in the morning, the ticket counter, because for some reason the little kiosks that they had, it wasn't working. And so I was just like, okay, I have to go to the counter anyway to drop off my bag. Well, I wanted to pay in cash as well for my checked bag. And so I handed the lady this cash, I should say. And she looked at it like I was handing her something just completely foreign. It was like, why are you handing me this? Just use a card. I could tell was on her face. But she accepted it anyway. She tucked it in an envelope of all things and just laid it there on the desk. And of course, I got my receipt, so that's good. I arrived so early, I was almost the first person to go through the security check. And hey, that's fine. It just meant I had time to sit and observe people, which is actually something I kind of enjoy doing. When I'm traveling, that is just for some reason, one of the cool things that I really like doing. It's about just experiencing humanity, I guess. I don't know. I'm starting to philosophize, and I don't, it always sounds weird when I say stuff like that. But when I hear myself say stuff like that, but for some reason, there's just an interesting component to that. Just watching people, watching the behavior, understanding what they do. That just pretty much, I don't know, I find interesting. And thankfully, I had decided to wear my long sleeve shirt. I was just basically wearing almost all the clothes I had with me. I wanted to pack extra light. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to pack my underwear and my long underwear for sleeping at night. And that's it as far as regular clothes are concerned. And so I was wearing my hiking shirt, my long sleeve hiking shirt, another shirt underneath, and of course my long hiking pants. And this is all, I mean, if you haven't traveled much, especially in airports, this is something I definitely recommend, because airports, but in particular airplanes, can be extremely cold. I find them very cold anyway. And I'm not one of those people who's always cold or whatever. I can survive in so many different types of temperatures, whether you're on a chicken bus in nowhere, South America, or you're in, a high rise, building and the sun is beating in on you through the glass or what have you, and it's uncomfortable either way. That's just a part of the travel experience. And I usually tend to see myself as that's not a problem. That's not the problem. But airplanes are cold. You're just sitting there. You don't have the opportunity to get up and move around. So I always like to wear my regular shoes. I never wear flip-flops on the plane. My feet will freeze. And then, of course, long pants and everything like that, because otherwise I'm just going to get really cold. And that's about all there is to it. All right, by 4:44, the security line had died down. But there was a little girl, 5 or 6 years old maybe. They flagged her for a random check, for patting down and all sorts of stuff. And I was like, really? I don't know. I look at that and it just seems ridiculous. I know they do what they got to do, and they're trying to make it look like they're not profiling anything or letting anyone slide or whatever. But still, it's one of those things that just doesn't sit very easy with me. All right, so they made the first announcement for boarding, the first boarding announcement by 4:47, and then by 4:53, my group, I was in the last group since I had used my Alaska Air Miles to get this flight, so I was in the last group to board. So it took them all of, about 6 minutes to go from, this is the initial boarding call, to, okay, those of you who are at the tail end of the aircraft, now you can board. So the flight lasts just slightly under an hour to get to Seattle. Landed at about 6:30 and went straight to Qdoba for my breakfast. And then I'm on the flight by about 7:32 on the flight to Ketchikan. And that flight time is right about an hour and a half. So I landed in Ketchikan, and there's a little bit of a time difference too from our Pacific time zone to the Alaska time zone. And so landed there in Ketchikan, and drizzling is all I can say for the weather. It was just a constant drizzle. Not a very hard drizzle, but still, I mean, if you stood there for 5 minutes, you're going to be pretty well soaked. It was just a nice constant drizzle. Definitely glad I had my raincoat with me and a few other items like that to help keep me and my stuff dry. But more on that in a little bit. Now, when you land in Ketchikan, the airport is across this little channel of the Inside Passage. There's 2 islands there. Ketchikan is on one island and the airport is on another island. So you have to take a ferry from the airport side to the town side, and that costs $6. You do get a return trip for free. So if for some reason you needed to go into town, but you returned the same day, you could do that for free. So they don't charge you that extra money. But I had to pay the $6 and I didn't return. So, that's fine. All right. I went straight to the bus stop. Well, I had actually packed my backpack in a big duffel bag. So I rearranged that first. Then I went to the ferry. Then I went to the bus stop. And since I had just paid for the ferry, I realized I didn't have exact change, which is a $2 bus fare. So I decided to download the bus app. I could see it right there. They had it advertised on the little bus kiosk thing, the little shelter, whatever they have for you. And the day pass was $5. I was like, oh, well, okay, that's fine. I was probably going to use it 3 times that day. So I was just like, fine, I'll just do it because I need to be able to ride on the bus. And that's when a local fella, it turns out he's a longshoreman, he stopped. He didn't slam on his brakes, but he stopped pretty quick. And he just yells out to me, "Hey, brother, you need a ride?" And I was like, well, do I really want to do this? I was like, I just don't know. You always hear, never, accept rides from strangers or whatever. Hitching is a bad thing, or you just never know what's going to happen, kind of a thing. And immediately after I got home as well, just a little anecdote here. Immediately after I got home, I read a news story online, just scrolling through my feed and looking at the various news stories. And there was a story of this fellow, I believe they were in Kentucky. So I think it was Kentucky. I could be wrong, somewhere in that region. And he was killed. And he had seen a guy at a gas station. The guy had asked for a ride. And the fella said, "I'll take you wherever you need to go, just let me take my family to the hotel. I'll come back and get you. So he took his family to the hotel. He went back. He took the guy, and he never returned. And that kind of a story is just like, that is totally not even remotely close to what I experienced in Alaska. And of course, I didn't have this knowledge of this story when I was there making this decision. But the thoughts that went through my mind were effectively twofold. When the guy asked me, "Hey, brother, you want to ride?" And I thought, well, maybe they're threefold. I thought, well, he the way he was talking, very casual, very congenial. Okay, so that's cool, but anyone can do that. And I got to thinking too, I was like, well, we are on an island. There's not many places that I can be taken to if he were to kidnap me. There's not many places I can be taken to without people otherwise knowing or seeing at least that I would be, involved. Like if he was taking me on a boat or whatever, likely there's going to be other people involved in knowing and seeing, hey, there's someone who took someone and whatever. So there'd be a witness to something. But then also I kind of did a little bit of my own profiling of my own. This dude was driving a Mercedes-Benz SUV. And I thought, well, if I do get kidnapped, I will be kidnapped in style. So I was just like, well, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I am here for a good experience, and I want to meet. I always love meeting the local people, the people who work and live in the areas that I go to. I mean, there was one time, now I was just on foot, but when I was in Croatia, this was way back in 2005, I was in the little town on the island of Hvar and in the little town of Stari Grad. Whoa, what a gorgeous little place. But I was met by this South African who was living there, and he took me on a little tour of the town, and he showed me some of the places that I just plumb would never have seen on my own. And I was really wishing in 2017 when I returned that I had remembered where some of those places were, because he took me to one particular place that was just so phenomenally awesome. In his words, back in 2005, it was the last remaining section of a wall from the old Greek civilization called Pharos. And it was in this lady's garage, and he happened to know the lady. And so I got a picture of that, the picture of the house, picture of the wall. And so I wandered the streets of that town just trying to see, does anything look familiar? And I did not find it. This was in 2017. I did not find it. So anyway, sidestep. This is just the kind of a thing that just also interests me in these experiences of our travel. And it's just kind of getting to see who the people are that are there. All right, so his name is Kirk. He took me to the Tongass Trading Company. I told him I needed to go to a place where I could buy some bear spray, some insect repellent, and most definitely some fuel for my stove. You're not supposed to fly with these aerosol type items, so I knew that was part of the planning. I knew that I was going to have to go to town and buy some of these things. Well, I had looked on Walmart's website before I had gone, before I'd left on the trip, and I realized Walmart was not going to have these things. So I was like, well, I'll just go to the Tongass company. It's going to probably be more than I want to spend, but it's one of those things where it's a big tourist trap store for all the tourists and cruises there that they have. But it's a dual level store, and they don't even have, I didn't even see anyway, a stairway on the interior of the store. It's on the exterior of the store where you go upstairs, and that's where they have all of their hiking gear, outdoorsman gear type stuffs, and all that other good stuff. All of the curio, I think is what the word they used. All of the knickknacks for the tourists, that's on the ground level. So he took me there. I bought my stuff, and then, well, you know what? I used the bug spray once, because I was a little bit just like doing it just to do it. And then I realized, at least for this season that I was there were effectively zero bugs. I saw one or two here and there, but effectively there were zero bugs. Now, it might also be there might be a benefit, at least at camp. I had sprayed permethrin on my clothes and my tent and a few other things. So it could be that they were just driven away from that. But when I was on trail as well, there were just no bugs. But again, it could have been the permethrin, I suppose, because I did spray my clothes and my camera bag and such with the permethrin. The store is right on the docks, and since right where the cruises come in, the cruise ships come in, and since the fellow that picked me up, he works on the docks, he has a special parking permit, so we literally parked right next to the store, right on the dock. That was kind of cool. I thought that was pretty sweet to be able to just have perfect access right there. He then offered to take me out to my campsite, which was Settlers Cove. Now, if you look at a map and you're looking for Settlers Cove, it's about 13, 14 miles outside of town. And I was like, well, oh man, this is a little earlier than I wanted to get out there, only because the way I had planned my meals, I wanted to be able to eat a lunch of some sort before I got out to camp. And so I let him know that. And he's like, oh, well, let's just find you a place to eat then. Well, Subway downtown was closed. It was Sunday, and they had a sign on their door about being short-staffed and such. Subway and Walmart was closed, so he took me to a different store that has a deli. We were told by one employee that it was open. We get over to the deli. Turns out it's closed. And so I thanked him. I said, look, you've got to go. That's totally cool. I'll just stay here. This is a grocery store. I'll go buy some stuff and I'll eat. So I literally bought some blue corn chips and guacamole and a Dr. Pepper, and that was my lunch. Not a very healthy lunch, but it did give me some calories and it filled my tummy, and I was able to attack the hike ahead. So after eating there, the bus stop was just right along the road. So got out to the bus stop, hopped on the bus, and took it to the end of the line. When I got to the end of the line of that bus line, I was dropped off at this what used to be a gas station. And I was a little bit surprised that they still use that as a bus drop, because it's an abandoned gas station and there's virtually nothing else around there. So people who do take this bus line out to the end, they just have to continue walking. Now, the bus driver told me that during I guess what we can call the rush hour, so basically before work starts and at the end of the day, they do go on up a little further to another town. And so a lot of people live up there. So I thought that was cool. That was fine. But of course, I was a little bit earlier in the day, so I had about 6 miles left to walk. And so I just got off the bus and started walking. And definitely, it was still drizzling. So as I was hiking along the road, I decided to stick my thumb out and see if I could get a ride. My pack had definitely grown in weight because I had added a few items, those few items at the Tongas store, the Tongas trading post. And so I was at least 45 pounds now, maybe slightly less, but around 45 pounds, let's say. And after about a mile and a half, another fella picked me up, and his name was Gary. And he was very generous as well. He took me all the way out there, the rest of the way. It was about, I'm going to say 4.5, 5 miles that he ended up taking me in total. And he operates fishing trips for injured veterans. It doesn't cost them a thing. They just have to get themselves up there, as is my understanding. I haven't looked at the website that he has yet, but I was just like, hey, this is really cool. I just think that's really awesome that he does this. And so I told him, like, hey, I've got some bear spray. I imagine you could probably use some bear spray. I'll be leaving on Friday and I can't take it with me on the plane. Would you like to have it? He was just like, oh, that would be amazing. So he gave me his phone number. So I texted him when I was done on Friday. And I told him specifically what campsite I was at and which tree I tucked it into, because I wanted to hide it so that only, he would know where it is. And I gave him specific directions and texted him a little picture as well. But he was very appreciative. And I was able to get a $50 can of bear spray for picking the guy up and taking him a few miles down the road. I arrived at camp at about 3:53 p.m., so almost 4 o'clock. And that was just over 12 hours after waking up earlier that morning. Now, of course, we have the time shift as well because I'm in a different time zone. So really is more in the neighborhood of about 14 hours, 13 hours, somewhere in there. At camp, I chose Site 9. There's no reservations that you can do, so you have to just show up and hope that there's an opening. And there was. I chose Site 9. It had a great platform to set up a tent, which was really nice because given all the rain that was happening, it's nice to have the tent platform built up. You're just not going to run the risk of the water pooling around your tent and getting things all nice and wet. So that was pretty cool. The cost was $20 per night, and I was scheduled to be there just 2 nights. But in a thing like this, I'm only going to pay 1 night at a time because you just never know. And if I have to leave, there's no getting my money back. So I paid the first night, and then the following day paid for the second night. They do have water at the campground, but nothing potable. So I figured that's all right. I've got my filter. And I'll just get the creek water for drinking, of course, after I filter it. And then I'll use this other water, which looked like it came straight from the creek. I'll use this other water for cooking once I've boiled it, or, when I cook, it's going to be boiled. So I finally got settled and took a waypoint on my GPS, and it was time to go exploring a bit. The Lunch Creek waterfall, this is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to go way out here, and it's also really just more of a set of cascading small tiny falls. But anyway, it was only about a quarter of a mile from the campground parking lot, and the campground parking lot was less than a quarter of a mile from my campsite itself. It was a very easy walk, and on the way out there, I actually got sidetracked with a little stairway that leads down to the rocks that take you out to the sea. And the creek comes in right there, and it just kind of fans out in a delta, tumbling over these rocks as it makes its way to the ocean, which is the inside passage. So it didn't really feel like an ocean because the water was just so incredibly calm. There's just a huge series of islands that were buried in behind, and it just really causes all the energy from the ocean, from the open ocean, to die down. And so it was really calm. The waves were super calm, and it just didn't seem like the ocean. I'm used to that constant surf just kind of pounding the wave or pounding the shore. And yeah, that just wasn't the case. It was very much like a standard little lake or pond, even though it was saltwater. So I found a little grouping of leaves on this little cliff's edge that was, because the trail was up on this little embankment that was about 20 feet higher than these rocks were that I had gotten myself down to. And it was nice and tucked away in this little area because by this time, actually, the sun had started to peek out a little bit. And so we had a few hours of sunshine. And so it was really harsh light. And I was just like, this has suddenly changed. I was kind of appreciating the drizzle. And then all of a sudden it stopped and all this harsh light comes out. Well, then I found this little place tucked away in this little nook here and got my first pictures made. And as I make my first pictures in a scene like this, in a place like this, there's something about just kind of like, I guess we can call it sort of like cracking an egg. You got to crack that shell. You got to take that first step. Whether it's going to be good or not, quite frankly, I don't know. I don't have much confidence, I guess I should say, nor do I care if the first image I take is actually any good, because it's about getting the ball rolling and getting the creative juices flowing and getting kind of in that groove. And so when you're doing that, it's not something I would say. I don't want people to think that there's any terror or any bad things happening or anything like that. What I'm trying to think about is to just encourage you. If you don't feel inspired, I think this is the thing. When you're coming to a place and you've settled in and you've given yourself that time and you're not feeling inspired to make an image, that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that, because you're just, in this case, I've just spent the previous 13 or 14 hours traveling, thinking about the idea that I might be taking some images, but I'm kind of pooped. The brain needs to totally unwind and needs to totally shift gears And until you forcefully do that, let me put it this way, I should say. When you forcefully do that, you're probably going to accelerate the opportunity. You're going to accelerate the idea of shifting your gears, as it were. Where if you just wait for that inspiration to come, it may take a couple of days. It may take a couple of hours. We don't know. And so just get that camera out of your bag and get to shooting already. Now, you've also heard me tell, and there's a huge difference here, though, because sometimes I've had people come to me and say, "Hey, Brent, these images, I worked over the scene. I came to this scene. I worked it over, and I'm just not satisfied with anything." And I'm just like, well, okay. My first question is, how long did you spend just soaking in the place? How long did you spend just observing? And oftentimes the answer is like 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes. I'm just like, that's not enough. You need time to wander and observe. And so when I was doing that, from the time that I had taken that GPS reading and I had started my hike, that is when I would say I've started my wandering and observing mode. And it probably, I would say, took at least a half an hour, if not more, before I found that image and I finally decided, okay, it's time for me to just start doing something. So I went down those stairs, I wandered around, I'm looking at all the opportunities of the water crashing down these rocks. I got some trees kind of coming up on the side. I've got other rocks over here and whatever else. And it was just about, I was in the mind of saying, boy, this is gorgeous. It's just the lighting really stinks right now because the sun came out. So I was like, I'll come back later. Not a big deal. And then I'm hunting around a little more and I'm just wandering and observing and looking around. And I got to this point, I'm about a half hour to 45 minutes into it. I'm just like, okay, I need to just start taking a picture already because I need to break that barrier, whatever that creative barrier is. And I need to move beyond now this simple observation and soaking it in. I need to still do that. I should always be observing and soaking it in, but it's time to move further. It's time to get a little beyond that. And so by making this first image, which I turned out I was actually quite pleased with, but as I'm making it, I'm thinking to myself, I may hate this image when I get back home, but I don't care because this is about getting the ball rolling. It's about making that progress and cracking that little bit of whatever that little bit of shell is left in the creative process that keeps me from creating good images, from seeing the image, from seeing the environment, the place that I'm in, from seeing it the way I need to see it in order to interpret it, in order to create a nice photograph of it, an intriguing photograph of it. So I took this image or made this image, and it was, like I said, it ended up great. And it really just kind of had it just let loose the floodgates. And when I went into the waterfall and I went in onto the loop trail and all the other places that day, I just had a fantastic time shooting and exploring and just making it happen. But it was that first image that just started the whole thing. And I was really pleased with the experience of the shoot. I was pleased with getting that idea started. And then, well, I don't want to say magic happens, but that's almost what it feels like sometimes. But it just all starts to click and you're on your way. So when you come to a new spot, that you've not done much research on, do let it soak in a little bit. Do let it affect you. Do let it come into your mind and just say, okay, what is special about this place that I want to talk about, that I want to magnify this element. I want to decrease that element, whatever the case is. And then once you have that first few images going, it's all going to start clicking into place. That's usually the experience I see happening for people anyway. In fact, come to think of it, I have yet to run into a student who, when they follow the process, you know me, I like to say the process makes it possible. When they follow the process, now there's always going to be nuances for each individual. Don't get me wrong here. But when they follow the process, it just works. So when you discover whatever that specific process is for you, it's then your job to repeat that process and to make the subtle nuanced adjustments that you need to make in order to address your specific needs or the needs of the location in which you're in, of course. But the process makes it possible. Focus on that, and you'll discover great things. All right, so I had mentioned I continued on the loop trail, got some great shots, and I'll talk about all the pictures at the end here. I'll talk in detail about the specific pictures at the end here. The thing about the loop trail, it's about a mile long. It does not go up the hill at all. You just kind of go around this little loop and you come back to the creek and, of course, then back to camp. Really nice little place, but there's just this is a different environment than what I'm used to shooting in. And, the forest and all that other stuff is really good, but it is about this... I like to call it's a wetter version than Western Washington, if that's possible. There was so much rain. And so there's just all this moss, all these little ferns, all these little leaves, all these little details. And I'm not usually the kind of photographer that zooms in on these little details, not right away. And I found myself, this is what I was needing to do in order to feel satisfied with the quantity and the quality of images that I was making. And to just capture the essence of the place, I needed to zoom in, I should say, with these little details and see what I could do to emphasize just these little bits, just these little pieces. And I had a great time. Certainly not all of them worked out for sure, but it certainly had lots of good ones that did work out. All right, so by the time I was done with this shoot, I was out of water. I had filled up with some water in town and in my water bottle, and I had run out of water. And I was like, okay, time to get some water going. So I got some water, pulled out my filter, and started to squeeze it through the filter, and it was clogged. This is part of the, when I opened the episode, I was mentioning just mistakes and feeling foolish and things like that. So the water filter that I use is a Sawyer Squeeze, and it attaches to a standard water bottle opening. So I use these 1 liter bottles, the smart water bottles. They're extremely convenient. They're nice and narrow. They hold a good amount of water, and I usually hike with 2 of them. And in this case, I only had the 1 bottle plus another bottle that was about 1.5 liters. And the Sawyer Squeeze also screws onto that. But the Sawyer Squeeze was clogged, which is actually a common thing. I just didn't test it before I left. And I felt super foolish. At that time, I was like, great, I have another day here. I've got water that I can boil, but then what do I do with it? So I had my jet boil, but I didn't have anything that I could store it in. And trying to pour it in from my jet boil into the little opening of my water bottle was impossible. Now, I probably could have devised some kind of some kind of funnel to get that in there. But then the water was boiling, and so that just disheveled my bottle and ruined my bottle. So I was just like, well, that didn't work. So I was really limited. And certainly I could boil water, but it's just extremely limiting onto what I can do and the quantity of water that I can have. So this was not making me happy at all. So I messaged Kirk, the guy that had initially picked me up. I messaged him at almost 8 o'clock, and I was just like, I'm kind of up a creek without a paddle here. And he's like, well, I can't come get you tonight, but I can get you in the morning. So he drove all the way out, those 13, 14 miles. He picked me up, took me back roughly 7 miles, 8 miles or so to Walmart, and then took me back out. I mean, what an angel. It was just amazing. And he didn't want any money. I offered to pay, and nope, this was not part of his deal. So after a while, I just quit offering him money. And he then volunteered to pick me up the following day, because that would have been Tuesday. And he volunteered to pick me up on Tuesday to transport me to my next campsite, which is where I was going to stay for the rest of the time. And they had drinking water there. It's just at this other place, there was no readily available drinking water. So that's what we did. And he came to pick me up right around 7 o'clock. So on Monday, he picked me up. I woke up, though, on Monday at about 3 o'clock, had a bit of a sore throat and a bit of a runny nose. I was like, oh, great. This is not what I need. Woke up again around 6:45. I'm just a morning person. So woke up around 6:45, and he hadn't messaged me. He had said he was going to message me when he had left, and he hadn't messaged me. So I was like, well, I'll get dressed anyway. He said 7 o'clock. And sure enough, he just showed on up. So went and I got my water, and then he brought me back, and I had my breakfast, oatmeal with craisins cooked in. And then I went and got on the trail. I figured I'm going to see how far I can get. Now, this Lunch Creek Trail, the previous day, Sunday, I'd gone around the loop. And then this time I was going to go up the mountain. There's a little lake up there. There's supposed to be another waterfall. And I was going to go up the mountain. Well, that's about 4.5 miles. I was like, we'll just see how far I get. I've got this cold now. It's going to affect my energy. We'll just see how far I get. Well, I ended up getting 1.42 miles up the trail. Now, that was actually started at my campsite, I believe. So maybe a little bit less as far as the trail is concerned. Found some great images, had a great time, had a fantastic location to have lunch. I was just walking very slowly and just relaxed there next to the creek, a little bit of a waterfall right there. Just gorgeous place to have lunch. And a bunch of day trippers from the cruise ships. They're just walking in and out and in and out. I wasn't too far up the trail to go beyond where the day trippers get to. But anyway, walked on back to camp and took a nap. Definitely low on energy. So took a little bit of a cold medicine pill as well. And boy, howdy, that nap was amazing. Woke up feeling a bit more miserable. My sinuses were getting a little worse. My sore throat about the same, but still just kind of feeling a bit miserable. Down in tons of water. And I had noticed in some other campsites that there was some wood. And I was like, why don't I just start a fire? This will be a great way to end the day. So actually, I ended up going and taking some wood from these other empty campsites and broke a few pieces off so that could be my kindling, ripped a couple of pages out of my journal to get it started. And I actually had a book of matches on me. I had also purchased a cigarette lighter to light my jet boil, because many times, the jet boil doesn't ignite off of its internal little sparky thing. So I bought a cigarette lighter too, and I was just going to use that. But then I found these matches. I was like, well, I wasn't supposed to fly with those either, but oh well. So I burned the matches up and started the fire. And after a little while, I ended up, I just decided I'll eat supper. And then after supper, the clouds rolled in. So it had gotten clear, just like the previous day, it had gotten clear. But then the clouds rolled in. I was like, oh, I'm going to go out and shoot again. And this was when I had wished I had just brought my muck boots, because I was just wearing my regular hiking boots, and they're not waterproof. My muck boots, 100% waterproof, all the way up my calf, almost to my knee. And they're amazing. And I could have just walked right in the creek as it's tumbling into the ocean and not had a problem with my feet getting wet at all. The rain wouldn't have bothered me at all. It was awesome. It was really good. So I didn't bring my muck boots. I just had regular hiking boots and my flip-flops for around camp. So I just doused the fire and headed off to go make more images. So some of the favorite images that I shot were some panoramas of this cascading area. And I was at about 24 millimeters and 3 or 4 frames wide, and just made a nice black and white set of images of the water cascading into the ocean. Now, I mean, you don't see the ocean, you just see the water cascading down. So it's still all fresh water. So the sunset was 8:54, and I finished shooting at about 8, and I was headed back to camp and definitely just exhausted. But as I got back to camp, the fire had literally started up again. And I was like, oh, well, good thing I came back, and good thing the rest of the forest is wet with all this rain, because obviously I did not douse that good enough. So I then messaged Kirk to see if he'd be able to transfer me to the other camp just to verify. I took another pill, enjoyed the fire a little bit longer. When that sinus pressure was starting to relieve a little bit, it was finally time to crawl into bed. So Kirk had messaged me sometime during the night, and on Tuesday morning at about 4 a.m., for some reason I woke up, and he had said he would be there by 9. I was like, awesome. So I crawled out of bed at around 6:15 and had my breakfast, blueberry and strawberry oatmeal, and then I started packing. Now, it had rained most of the night. Let me tell you, if anyone tells you, if it's not, especially in August, if it's not going to rain, if they tell you it's going to clear out, don't believe them. Gary, the fellow that had brought me out to this campsite when I was hitchhiking, he had mentioned, oh, it's supposed to clear out by the end of the week, or it's supposed to clear out in a couple of days, something along those lines. I was like, oh, cool, great. So by the time Tuesday rolled around, I was literally expecting it to kind of clear out. Now, I had not looked at any weather reports before going. I just knew I had looked at weather history, and I had looked at what I should expect, and they did definitely say expect rain. And so I was like, okay, I'll expect rain. I'll prepare for rain, because last year it's almost been, actually at the day I record this, it was 365 days ago. So basically September 3 last year was the day that I left on my sabbatical journey to Isle Royale National Park, was my first stop. Boy, howdy did it rain when I was there. And I was totally prepared, and everything was great. There was no problems with my experience with the rain. I was even in a smaller tent, and I didn't have a tarp there either. I didn't have a tarp here to put over my things. And it was fine. I didn't have any problems. It was one of those mental preparedness things where I was just always ready for the rain. I was always ready for the unknown coming idea. And here, being that I was camping and not backpacking, I think I just had a different mental state of being or whatever. And so I had left my insoles of my boots out by the fire. They were hanging on the metal grate. I had hoped that they would dry overnight. And the fire ring was warm, and so they were getting a little bit of drying power going. But, of course, it started raining all night. And so my insoles were just soaked. It was not a fun time. This is, again, one of the reasons why I wish I'd just taken my muck boots. But anyway, thankfully, my hiking boots, I have 2 insoles in there because they don't fit me just right. And so by having another set of insoles, then they fit mostly beautifully. And so I just wore them with my thick wool socks without that extra insole in there. And I was fine for the day, but it was still a little not as comfortable as it normally was. All right, so my packing was done by 7:45, and I decided to just sit and wait for Kirk rather than go out and shoot. My energy was just really low. And since I knew I didn't have to hike all that way back to town so I could then hitch or otherwise take a bus to the next campsite, I was just like, hallelujah, this is going to be great. I'll just wait. Well, he ended up showing up at around 11 o'clock instead of 9. And he had a friend with him, and he was a little bit rushed because he was so late. He had to be at work by a certain time and whatever. And so he was like, you just need to be dropped off, right? Do you need anything else? I was like, nope, just a quick drop is it. That's all I need. He was like, all right, brother. And so he dropped me off, and that was the last I saw of him. I did message him a few times to thank him for that. But I was now at Signal Creek Campground, and this is right on the banks of Ward Lake. And this is significantly closer to town than where I was out there at Settlers Cove. So after setting up camp, I decided to walk to the bus stop. Now, when you go to camp, you have to go up and around on the road, and it takes you like 3 extra miles from the bus stop. When you walk there's this little offshoot road that takes you to Frog Pond, and then there's a Frog Pond trail that takes you straight into Signal Creek Campground. And so I took that trail and took it to Frog Pond, then took the road out to the main road and hopped on the bus. And I then went into town for a little bit, got a lunch, finally got my sandwich there at Subway. And boy, howdy, did they load it up. They know how to make a sandwich. That was good. And you might say, Brent, why didn't you eat some local places and whatever else? Well, it's because I am allergic to dairy, and so I can't do any dairy, and I'm also a vegetarian. So that means the only thing in the traditional lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet, the only thing I would eat is eggs. So since seafood is the main fare of any of these types of places up in Alaska, that's just not going to fit. So a place like Subway, I know with a surety I can get something that isn't going to make me sick and that otherwise satisfies my vegetarian desires. So it was one of the best Subway sandwiches I've had. So kudos to the people there at the Ketchikan Subway. So after doing a little bit of walking around the downtown area and seeing what that's like, I finally decided, you know what, it's time to head up for my hike. I wanted to go to Carlana Lake. And so I got on the bus, and this is when I decided this day also, I decided to use my bus pass. So I used the bus pass to get into town, used it to get back out of town just a little bit. I had to walk through this residential area to get to Carlana Lake. Trailhead, continued on up the trail. And when I had set up camp, it was a beautiful day. I mean, the sun was out. Things were warming up. I was like, hey, all my stuff that got soaked the previous night, I'm going to let it dry out today. Oh, this is so nice. I was like, maybe Gary was right. I was just like, oh, this is amazing. Hallelujah. These things are going to be dry. So I got up to Carlana Lake. I'm starting to take a video for the Great Outdoors Photography School and tooling along, getting some really good shots, oh my goodness, it was so peaceful. This lake was so peaceful and so gorgeous and so beautiful. And the hills going up behind it and the little bit of mist, the little clouds that were frolicking in the trees on the way up the hillside. Oh my goodness, it was just gorgeous. In the sky was very clear. So my compositions, I just totally cut out the sky. There were a few white puffy clouds, but the contrast was so great from the dark evergreen trees. I was just like, nah, this isn't going to make a very nice picture. I just like it right zoomed in. Get these puffy clouds with the evergreen trees behind, the lake and the dock that I had found, and these other things along the reflections of the water, just making a great, great set of images. And of course, still getting some of the details too, zooming in, finding some of the details that are very important. So I still had my cold and my sinus pressure, but it was starting to minimize. I was getting over it. It was not that big of a deal today as it had been the previous day. But then it started raining and it was more than a drizzle. So I definitely headed back earlier than I anticipated. I had been looking at the bus schedule and was like, okay, if I get up here, it'll take me this long. So I tracked how long it took me to get up there and I figured how long it would take me to get back. And I was just like, okay, I need to start heading back by a certain time to get the last bus, and I'll take it to that same bus stop. I'll then walk that mile to camp and everything will be fine. Nothing wrong. Well, it started raining. And so I was like, okay, I probably should head back early because this was way more than a drizzle. Now, it wasn't like a super deluge downpour, but it was way more than a drizzle. And I was like, great. I laid all my things out at camp. I had even left so that my tent could dry and the things inside my tent could dry a little bit better. I'd even left the rain fly off my tent. Now I did put my travel sheet over my tent, and that's actually what kept the interior of my tent dry. So the tent was underneath some very substantial trees, and so that helped reduce the amount of water that hit my tent. And then this travel sheet had gotten soaked, but that kept my bed and my other things inside the tent just wonderfully dry. So that was amazing. So I was really grateful for that. But as I'm going back, I'm on the trail, and I'm heading back down the hill, and I get into the residential area, and I'm trying to think, what am I going to do? I was like, this is really starting to tick me off. I was like, and this is what I decided: never let anybody tell you anything other than it is going to rain in Southeast Alaska. I don't care the season. I don't care. You just need to prepare and always be prepared. And so I made a decision. I was going to actually not just go straight to camp. I was going to stop at Walmart. I was going to buy a tarp and some rope. And then I was going to be able to set that up. And I was going to then have to get another blanket of some sort, because I figured my camping quilt, my backpacking quilt, which is just like a sleeping bag. It's just, it only has a box for your feet, and then it opens up and then it just covers you. It doesn't fully wrap around you. So yeah, I figured that was going to be wet, which thankfully it wasn't, but I bought a fleece blanket as well. So I bought the tarp, rope, and fleece blanket and some Junior Mints, and I think I probably bought a Dr. Pepper as well. I was a bit ticked off. See, to me, the Dr. Pepper is my version of an adult beverage. So when I'm just like, oh, this sucks, or whatever, life is frustrating or whatever, I'm like, I just need an adult beverage. And to me, yeah, Dr. Pepper is my adult beverage. So anywho, got back to camp, set up the tarp, and oh my goodness, it's just like, oh, this is so wonderful. To be able to have this area that was still dripping wet, but I saw the promise. I saw the idea that, oh yeah, we're going to have some dry area now, and I don't have to worry about stuff. It was amazing because it did start to dry out finally. But one of the things also that I had left out was my journal. And boy, howdy, you should see it now. It was completely and utterly and 100% soaked. All the pages were just matted together. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to write anything in that anymore. So I just didn't use it ever again. Until I got home, I laid it out in my garage, and my garage is a nice metal roof, and it gets stinking hot in here, even if it's not too hot outside. And it gets stinking hot in here. And it's pretty dry out here in Northeast Oregon, Southeast Washington. So the journal dried out pretty quick. And then I worked with it. And so I'm going to continue to use it because now it's got a great character to it with all those wrinkled pages. But I was not able to take my notes anymore while I was on site, which kind of bummed me out. So that's another lesson learned. Definitely don't let your journal get all soaked and wet. Oh, all right. So the next day was Wednesday, and it was my goal to head up from Ward Lake to Connell Lake. So this meant I wasn't going to use any public transport. I wasn't going to go into town at all. It was finally just me and nature only for the whole day, which was nice. And this is, again, part of the whole planning and the whole mindset shift of what you're expecting and what you're doing when you're on a trip like this. If I were to do this again, I certainly am better prepared for what it takes to have a successful trip. It's just that I really wish I had just put myself more in a mindset as I prepared for the trip. I should have put myself more in a mindset of pure backpacking, because I think I would have been just simply better prepared at that time, for this time. All right, so I've mostly focused on the little details of various subjects as I walked up Ward Creek. And as I said before, this isn't really my go-to type of photography, but I was having a lot of fun focusing in on these different genres, these different subject types. So there was a lot of good stuff I was finding. I was really pleased certainly still really pleased to have this experience. A couple of focus stacks were made, and thankfully my cold was dissipating even more. My energy was really coming back, but the runny nose, the blowing of the nose and such, that was still there. But really it was about my energy was starting to return. And so I had definitely hoped to see some bear. As I'm walking up various parts of the creek, there's these little openings, there's these little cascades, is whatever, because there were some salmon that were in the creeks. In Signal Creek, right at camp, I saw always at the mouth of the creek where it pours into Ward Lake, at least 7 fish always at the mouth of the creek as they're moving up the creek. There wasn't, loads and loads of fish like there probably is literally right now in early September, but it's at the very beginning of the spawning season. And so I was thinking maybe I'll see some bear. And so I had decided at the last minute that I would take my 70 to 300 lens just in case I came across some bear. Well, as it turns out, I actually did not use that lens at all the whole trip. It was just a bunch of dead weight. But whatever, that's fine. At least I still had it, because if I had seen some bear, I would have been pretty frustrated to not have that lens. So they only have black bears on the island. There are not any grizzly bears. And still, I did not see any. However, after my hike was done, so it was about in the neighborhood of 4 to 4.5 miles up the hill in total for all my little this way and that ways and other little things that I had done. It was about 4.5 miles. I had started to come back on the road. There's this parking lot there. And I was like, hey, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, give my feet a little bit of a rest and dry out. And as I'm sitting there, this older gentleman in a nice big GMC truck or whatever, hey, you want to ride somewhere? I was like, well, I am not going to turn that down. So I was like, well, I'm camping down there at Signal Creek. Oh, no problem, he says. He's just like, but I'm waiting for some teenagers. They should be here soon. I was like, all right, no worries. So loaded my gear up, got, almost instantly the teenagers were there, and they had reported they did not see any bear either. And so they were talking back and forth with this fella. And I was like, well, all right, at least I wasn't too far off base of my hope of seeing bear. From what I read and what I was understanding, I was like, maybe there's a chance. But I knew I was not in the prime season for salmon run. So I was just like, yeah, we'll see. I want to be prepared, but if I don't, I don't. So they had been there specifically looking for bear, and they didn't see any either. So I was like, all right. So I wasn't too far off base. So that's cool. I was a bit tuckered out when I got back to camp, and I can't remember what time it was, but time had gone by, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to take the rest of the afternoon off. And it was a little bit on the later side, had certainly my supper, read a little bit out of my book. I couldn't do any journaling because my journal was just dripping wet. And so I had been trying to dry it out, at least the pages that I was going to write on, but no, not going to happen. I did not have a fire there at this campsite. And I didn't want to use my stove either to dry anything out substantially, at least not yet, because I was, needing it to cook my food, and I did not want to go into town again to buy another canister for my stove. All right, Thursday, the following day. This is my next to last day. Definitely a big day. I was planning to head to Lake Perseverance. And this was a steeper hike than the Connell Lake hike was, but it was about the same distance. But also, there's no road to return, so no opportunity for someone to give me a ride back. So I knew I was getting into about an 8-mile hike this day. I still had my cold a little bit, certainly the nose and whatever else, but my energy almost back to 100%. So I was feeling really good. I was up for this hike. I was feeling real good. All right. So getting on up there, the sun was a little bit on the brighter side of things usually, but it was actually quite the perfect day. I usually just had to wait a little bit, then a cloud would come in. Now, there was one shot I had to wait at least a half an hour. And it was all right because I'm walking up the hill and then I see kind of down the embankment, I should say, because it's extremely steep. And I could see that people previously had gone down, stepping on this stump, that route, whatever. But there was no anything like a defined trail, nothing like that. So I got down there, and after I got down there and I set up, the bright sun came out. I was like, I spent all this energy. I am just going to wait, and we'll see what happens. So literally I sat there for like a half an hour. And, when you're so far out of civilization, at least it felt like it. Now, honestly, I was, still hearing a lot of airplanes land and things like that because I was fairly close to the airport. But otherwise, as far as just the sheer beauty of this nature, it was just like, oh yeah, this is excellent. This is why it's so wonderful. This is why, one of the reasons why I do this. It's so rejuvenating to the spirit and to the soul. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. So got my shots, mostly did panos because there was just so much good stuff and I needed to get all across the way. I ended up shooting extra wide, not only extra wide on the lens itself, but also extra wide left and right when I was getting the panos because I knew it was just, there was a lot of items that were really close and a lot of items, of course, that are far away. And when I have that kind of scenario, there's going to be some parallax. And that is the shifting of the relationship of the objects as you turn the lens, whichever direction you're going with your pano. In the Great Outdoors Photography School live session one time, we had a question about what's the value of a nodal rail when doing panos. And my initial response has always been, until recently, my initial response has been, they're not really that necessary. If you shoot on a wider angle lens, it's less necessary because your nodal point of your lens is so close to where your camera is already mounted on your tripod anyway, that it's quite minimal. It's not that big of a deal. If a longer lens, of course, you start to have an issue. But then also it's just extra weight, extra hassle. And usually when I do, I shouldn't say usually, but many times when I do a pano, there's not that many objects that are both near and far. And so when everything is a certain distance away, that parallax is so minimized, if it even exists, if it's even detectable, there's just not an issue. Well, here I was just like, you know what? We had just had this conversation and I know this is going to be a problem because I have this tree trunk right here that's foundational in my foreground. Is leading into the scene. I've got the waterfall going through the scene. I've got all these other tree elements and all these other things going on. There's going to be a parallax issue. Boy, howdy, if I had a nodal rail. So anyway, we'll see if I get one here in the next months or so, because it would probably be very nice. And it really, come to think of it, it would not add that much weight. They're not that heavy. So I got the shots, headed on up back that cliff, whatever. There was a gal actually wanting to come down and see what I was getting myself into. And I was like, oh yeah, it's beautiful. It's just gorgeous down there. And so we traded places basically. And I continued on up the trail to the north end of Lake Perseverance. And at the north edge of Lake Perseverance, because the trail then heads south, it connects with the Minerva Mountain Trail, which connects with the Carlana Lake Trail. And one of the dreams I had when I was doing my research was, hey, the Carlana Lake, I've just been there. What a great trail this would be. It goes up on the crest of Minerva Mountain. And what an awesome thing it would be to do this hike. And I was already about halfway done with it. But I'd gotten to this platform that the Forest Service had put up for backpackers. And I was like, yeah, I'd still, while I had been feeling really good at the beginning of the hike, my energy was just one of those things again, where I was like, I'm just not sure this is the best thing for me because I still have quite the incline to go up in order to do this trail. So I was like, I'm just going to go ahead, have my lunch here at this platform, and then I'll turn around. And quite literally, I did not shoot a blame picture except for with my cell phone while I was there. There was just not a scene and not a composition that I could find that I was at least inspired by. And everything, and I walked around a little bit. Everything was so muddy. Everything was so rough and tumble. Everything, and the light was very, very harsh. And there was just nothing that, with that combination, that came out to me and said, this is a great looking thing. This is going to work really well. So relaxed quite a bit there at Lake Perseverance and finally decided, okay, time to head back. So returned to camp and had another relaxing time at my camp at Ward Lake, Signal Creek Campground, just hoping that more things would dry out. Oh, but they were, so that was good. That's very good. Because Thursday was very much a drying day. It hardly rained. It did a little bit, but compared to the other days, it hardly rained. And of course, everything was under the tarp. So it was nice. All right, the last day, Friday. Time to go home. But my flight left at about 3:30 p.m. and I had plenty of time. As you know, I'm a morning guy, so I wake up nice and early anyway. But as you also know, I like to show up early, and I like to give myself plenty of time just to make sure if something goes wrong, it's not my fault. It's about the only way to put it. So woke up early, decided to walk around Ward Lake because there's a nice trail that goes around Ward Lake. And I had gone around one side as I was going up to Connell Lake, but I didn't go around the other way. So I was like, I'm just going to go around the other way and see what I can find. And so went around the other way, made a few great little shots, and then came back to camp, had breakfast, packed up. And I really had to pack well because certainly I was flying home. So everything was packed up, even that extra tarp and that extra fleece blanket and my extra this, extra that. Now I had bundled my bear spray and the other items that I was going to leave for Gary. I put it in a little Walmart bag, tucked it into the crook of a tree, underneath the roots where there's a little cave type thing. Texted him where it was and left it there, and then off on the trail, the Frog Pond Trail, down to the bus stop to then, of course, pick that up, pay my $2, and then get to the airport. Pay the $6 ferry fee. I'm at the airport at least, right about exactly 4 hours early. And I was contemplating, do I want to go into town, drop my bag, and then go back into town? That's going to cost me an extra $6 because I get the return free, but then when I come back to the airport, it's going to cost me another $6. Or do I just want to stay there and just not bother with that? Because the ferry has its schedule, the buses have their schedules. Delay, or at least opportunities for delay is what I'm thinking in my mind. I was like, this is going to be rough. Well, when I got to the ticket counter and I paid my money for the checked bags, the lady asks me, are you on the delayed flight? I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just here now. What are you calling delayed? I don't know. And this was one of the reasons I had previously stated in the other episode talking about the preparing for this trip, that I had decided to go to Alaska in the first place because Alaska Airlines just has boatloads of flights. They were still going to be able to get me home some way, somehow. Where if I had gone to like Florida or Michigan or whatever the case might have been, they would have had very few flights in and out of those locations. And if I had missed a flight, then that would have been it. It would have been the next day, or who knows what would have happened. Like when I had left Walla Walla, there was a guy there. He was part of a much larger party. And the lady at the counter was saying, well, I'm sorry, but your flight to Denver, he was going to fly from Walla Walla to Seattle to Denver. It was like, well, your flight to Denver has been canceled because of short staff. It was like, that would be frustrating. So what they ended up doing, he was going to fly from Walla Walla to Seattle to Spokane, which is just north of Walla Walla, but anyway, to Phoenix to Denver. I was just like, alrighty then. If that isn't, going around Robin Hood's barn. I mean, they still got to Denver, but what a pain in the rear to get your family to Denver. I knew that likelihood, that potential might be an issue. And I was just like, if I go to Alaska, that's going to be even less of an issue. So let's just go to Alaska. Well, yeah. Okay. So my flight was delayed a little bit. Not a big deal. So when I checked in, it was set to be delayed about, I don't know, an hour, somewhere in there. Now that I'd spent a lot of time going through line and such, we were right about, again, at that 4-hour limit of when the flight would leave. And I was like, all right. I'm thinking about the ferry schedule, thinking about the bus schedules, trying to think, can this work? I was like, I'll just do it. I think I can make it work. And if push comes to shove, I'll just take a cab back to the airport. Well, the airport ferry anyway. And so I decided to do it. And while I'm out there, I went back and got another sandwich at Subway. And I checked my app for the airline and it had been delayed again. It's like, no problem. This is going to be easy. So I just kind of cut loose and didn't worry about it from there. Got back to the airport with, I don't know, a couple of hours still left to go and just chilled at the airport. Spent way too much for a couple of drinks. A V8, the tiny little 6-ounce, I think it was V8, was like $2.50. But I was like, you know what? I need my vegetables. I had just had a great sandwich, but I was still feeling a little bit shy on the healthy type stuff. So I was like, yeah, I'll take one of those. And then flew to Seattle. My layover was in the neighborhood of 2 hours, maybe slightly more. And then flew on into Walla Walla and landed at almost midnight. And then, of course, got home. It's about a 15-minute drive home. And then that was that. So that's my journey. Let's talk a little bit about expenses, because I promised in the previous episode that I would talk all about expenses. And then, of course, we'll talk about a few of these photographs that you'll find on the show notes website or in the Facebook group. So from the get-go, I was wanting to do this trip on the cheap. I wasn't going to rent a car. I wasn't going to pay for airfare. I was using my air miles. So in total, after saving up all my receipts and adding everything, so in the last episode where I talked about the planning for this trip, I had mentioned about spending $200 and some odd up to that point. Well, in total, so the additional items that I spent came out to $567.09. So this whole trip, 6 days in the Ketchikan area, was less than $600. Now, certainly, I'd had a great benefit because of the massive generosity from Kirk and Gary, especially Kirk, who provided transportation, made things a lot easier, and I didn't have to pay for it. So many, many thanks goes out to Kirk and Gary for sure. All right, let's take a quick gander at a few of these photographs. So the first one is that first image I was talking about, where I just needed to crack that barrier of getting the ball rolling. And it turned out I was actually pretty pleased with this image. It's a bunch of leaves on what looks kind of like a log, but it's actually rocks, and a few grass elements and moss elements and such going on through there. Very nice little area, just a little kind of a peaceful feel of just all the greenery, all the new life that is springing forth here from the various, the tiny amounts of soil and nutrients that are available on the edge of these rocks here. But it was a great little composition, a great little experience to do. All right, so the next shot is this black and white, where we have 3 different areas where water is tumbling. The main central area is going off to the right-hand side. Just a little bit to the left of that, I've got this great big slicing tree trunk. That is the only element that's really substantially strong and straight. Everything else has very much organic textures and shapes and forms and all sorts of things. The water starts in the central upper portion of the frame, and then it flows on down, and then it splits, and then you have this one section on the far left where some water's tumbling, and then the central right area where it's tumbling. I was on a bridge, and this is the part that's like a quarter of a mile from the trailhead. Just gorgeous, just amazing. I had looked for a spot to get down into the water here from the bridge, but there wasn't a very convenient spot. And this is another thing where if I had brought my muck boots or something else that I would not feel too terrible getting wet, I would have just gone down to where the water is coming into the ocean and just walked up, because it was very short distance and I could have just walked up. But I decided not to do that because I only had my flip-flops. Those were the only things I was willing to get soaked. And walking in a creek like this in flip-flops, you might as well be barefoot. And I'm not going to do something like this that's barefoot because I don't have enough calluses on the bottom of my feet to keep them from getting all slashed. So anywho, limits to my photographic experience, I suppose, but also, I guess, just info for the next time. Really, the next time I go to Alaska, I just need to bring my muck boots. Everybody that I saw, almost everybody, is just wearing muck boots. And I was just like, yeah, I'm actually almost out of sorts because I have my hiking boots instead of my muck boots. I really just need to bring my muck boots. All right, this next shot is one of those awesome places where I had kind of sort of crawled down a little bit to get near, right in the water almost. And it's very much a focus stack. Probably, 6 or 7 images of a focus stack. Now, this is a pretty amazing deal. I upgraded my license for Helicon Focus, and Helicon Focus can take DNG raw images. And then they have a little plug-in with Lightroom. So you just click these images, you click the button that says export to Helicon. It will then tell Lightroom to convert them to DNG. It will import them into Helicon. It will do the focus stacking. You then can save out that DNG information, that DNG file. Now, this DNG file, my normal CR3 files from this Canon R5 are about 42 to 43 megabytes, somewhere in that department. I forget exactly which, but somewhere in that department. This DNG file, once it was all stacked and everything out of Helicon Focus, was about almost 160 megabytes. So it's a significantly larger file, but we get everything in focus that we want to have in focus. It's amazing. There's no chance that the depth of field would have done what I needed to do to get all of this in focus. It just absolutely was not going to happen. This next shot is probably my favorite composition from the entire trip. This is along Lunch Creek and sort of close to where I had my lunch. Literally ate my lunch along Lunch Creek. And it's a 2-frame panel, and we have the water just cascading down in the foreground type area, and then this magical greenery happening in the background. And it's just an amazing shot. But here's the thing, and I talked about this at length with my live group, and I included this in a training video in the Great Outdoors Photography School. But I talked about the very specific nuances of depth of field and our depth of field calculators. Now, I did not use a depth of field calculator on this image, but I was relying a bit on experience. And what that experience told me was, hey, if I've put my focus point on this foreground element that has these 2 leaves, it's about in the central part of the image, and I believe that's where I focus anyway. I don't have it exactly memorized or whatever, but that's where I would have focused if I'm remembering correctly. But anyway, if I put my focus point there and I take it in at about f11, I'm at 24 millimeters on my lens, I should well have enough depth of field to get everything in focus. Well, in the session, when I was talking about this in the live session with my Great Outdoors Photography School members, I actually had a member whip out a depth of field calculator, and he's like, "Well, Brent, you said you're at 24 millimeters." So he's like, "So how far away from you would you say, in general, is that rock that you focused on?" I was like, "Okay, it's probably 10 feet away." And so he's like, "Okay, so 10 feet at f11, 24 millimeters. the depth of field calculates that it goes to infinity. And I was like, exactly. That is our problem. Because when I zoom in on this log that's on the left-hand side, I can see that it's not in sharp focus. Now, for the view that you're going to have in the Facebook or on the website, there's no chance that you're going to be able to look at that and say, it's not in focus, or it feels like it's in focus. It falls within that range of acceptably sharp focus, which is how I define depth of field, the range of acceptably sharp focus. But when I enlarge it in Lightroom and I click on it and I go to the 100% view, that changes the magnification of the subject. And all of your depth of field calculators are calibrated to give you results, depth of field results, to an 8x10 image. So that would mean that this image from top to bottom, since I've photographed it horizontally, would be expanded to 8 inches tall. And in the view that I have in Lightroom regularly on my screen, physically on my screen, it's in the neighborhood of 6.5, maybe, if I'm pushing it, 7 inches. So when I do that and I see it in Lightroom under normal circumstances, it looks perfectly in focus. But when I click on that 100% view, it then changes it so that the image is pixel for pixel now. And so that effectively enlarges it so that the overall height of the image is the equivalent of, say, 20-some inches or whatever. And because we have a different calculation now, a different viewpoint, a different ending result on what the physical size is, we can then see all of the sins, as it were, that are happening in your depth of field. It is not completely in focus when I zoom in, when I pixel peep. Now, why is this an issue? Of course, we don't usually pixel peep, but the issue is, I love to print big. I have a big printer now. It's not working yet. I have a big printer now, 44 inches wide. I would love so much to make this image 44 inches tall by however long it needs to be, and to make it just a fantastically big mural. Now, in all honesty, I'd probably make it 36 inches or so to make it a little more manageable. But to make this like a 36-inch canvas and to just have it be massive and have all that green glowing off the canvas, that is just a dream of mine. But I'm pretty sure I would be dissatisfied with the results because of the enlargement. It's not going to be in focus. And the takeaway here is, if you're going to make an enlargement, if you know that you want to make it big, don't rely just purely on your depth of field. Get yourself a focus stack and get that working. Now, I did have an opportunity to play around with grafting in another image because I rephotographed this specific subject, that log in question, for a vertical panel. But the problem was I had moved my camera to the left and I also had moved it down. So it was a vastly different perspective, and the alignment and everything just didn't work well at all. So I was like, well, it was a good practice, but it's not going to work. So I'm not going to show that image. I'm not going to otherwise think about that image. It just is what it is. All right, these next few images are just more along the creek and just having a great time with the creek. The extreme pano, the lake that you see there, that's Carolina Lake. And you can see, hopefully you will get a sense of the peace that comes through when you look at this image. Just so peaceful, so awesome, so wonderful there at Carolina Lake. And then I got a few other small ones, just excellent, excellent stuff. All right, this next image, a black and white vertical pano of some tree roots, and then finally 2 little trunks going up. I really loved this shot because of the way that the trees behave there in Alaska. It was so cool. They grow out of these trunks, these stumps that are decaying, and they are decaying out from underneath these other trees then. So the trees will grow on top of the stumps will decay, and then you have this hollow cavern almost that these roots are still shaping around It's just that thing that they shaped around are no longer there. And it's just so mind-blowing, so awesome. And then I made a video on this one. I think it's going to go on YouTube. I just haven't edited it yet. But it's really just a quick video about the awesomeness of nature, the awesomeness of all of this stuff, all these created items, all this creation that is before us to enjoy and to see. I'll leave it. I have a quote that I'm going to talk about later, and just remember it connects back to this thinking here. It's just amazing. I just love it. But when we get to our dose of inspiration, we'll talk about it then. All right, this next image, just almost a boring image, really, as it relates to composition. Very symmetrical as it relates to that trail just cutting up the middle and everything like that. But it still feels quite ethereal, quite hopefully welcoming and inviting as far as getting you on the trail. And this image was actually an inspiration for the assignment that is coming due here in another, less than a week now, in the Great Outdoors Photography School, to where we do subtle or drastic, it doesn't matter, color adjustments. And then we're going to be looking at the analysis of how does it change? So how does it change the image? So when I was processing this image, I got it to look pretty much exactly the way I wanted it to. And I was just like, man, there's just something still missing. So in that central upper region where I had created this area to be really bright and really mystical and ethereal feeling, I then added just a touch of yellow tint to it. This is a radial gradient in Lightroom that I had all these settings applied to. And then I added just that little extra yellow, and it just hit and it just fell into place. It didn't adjust the color anywhere else. So those greens of the grasses and the ferns, etc., and those mosses on the tree trunks and everything, and the lower left and right corners, what I'm talking about here, those were perfectly colored. Those were perfectly everything else is what I wanted it to be. I just felt a lack of warmth in that other section of the other area. I was like, yep, I just need to warm it up just a hair. And so I did that, and it just, I really do love it anyway. All right, this next shot, this is where I got that image. I had gone down on the trail towards Lake Perseverance. I'd gone down that 30 to 40 foot, almost cliff-like embankment, and I overshot on the wide angle side of it. So I was really just getting just massive amounts of information coming into the frame, and it worked out really well. I really do appreciate how this thing came out. So the waterfall starts on the upper right. It flows, you can't see it. It goes behind and under some rocks, under this tree trunk that's invading the space. The tree trunk starts in the lower right-hand corner. And then the water just bursts forth in the middle of the image, and it flows towards the left side of the image. And all the detail, this is not a focus stack, but all the detail that's coming through in here, just really loving it. And had a really good time putting this image together. It really came together. I was really pleased how it just came together according to the vision I had set forth when I was there. So that always is a nice little bonus, a nice little help, whatever. All right, this next image along the same idea, along the same area, just repositioned myself a little bit and grabbed it from a different perspective. So a little bit more down the creek. And eliminating that one tree that was initially there, but just grabbing a different perspective of it. And then finally here, this I believe it's the last image. Nope, the second to last image is this big, huge, misty, bright image with some big elephant ear looking like leaves in the foreground. This is actually the view from my picnic table at camp. Is this not awesome? I mean, this is what camp is like. It was just so awesome. On the other side of this tree was the next campsite. I mean, it's just amazing. Just good stuff. And then finally, this next image is from Ward Lake on the last day I was there, walking around the lake on the other side that I'd mentioned. And so as the sun is coming up, and I was like, you know what, this is going to make a great black and white. And then I tinted it a little bit of blue as well. But we have these competing forces: the really dark reflection in the lake, the dark reflection of the shadow area of the trees and the mountains going up behind the lake. We then have a little bit of the reflection of the clouds in the lake, and then of course the foreground area. We have these little reeds that are kind of popping up out of the water and creating their own very distinct texture. Just good stuff. Very, very good stuff. Really enjoyed the time there. And this is where, like I had mentioned, where hindsight being 2020, the time there was just delightful. When I first got back, though, I remember thinking, this is a lot of hassle flying and all this stuff. I was like, it's a lot of hassle, because there was a time before COVID, basically, where you could have put me on a plane and I could, I could fly anywhere and just keep hopping from place to place to place, and I would have loved it. And now here we are 2.5, 3 years later, and from my most recent flight previous to this, and I'm looking at things and I'm just like, you know what? The actual literal act of flying, I don't think it's that different. There's hardly anything, except for the delays and such that are very common today. Going through security, going through the airport, just dealing with all of that, as best as I can tell, it's nearly identical to pre-COVID times. But certainly something in my mind, I know for me, has shifted. And I just had this overwhelming sense of just like, man, this is a lot of hassle to go through all this stuff just to get up there to shoot a place that's so similar to what I have right here at Mount Rainier or any of these other locations. Olympic National Park is going to be probably the most similar landscape that we would have to the Ketchikan area, being that it's a rainforest. But, as time goes on, that initial sense of whatever, I'll just call it negativity, it has definitely waned. It has definitely subsided, I guess, a lot. And I have another flight coming up here in October. I'm going to Las Vegas. So I have also previously announced, and I'll try to make sure I get it out again in the next episode, but I have previously announced that, October 19, I'm looking to do a meetup in Las Vegas, Nevada. And if you're in the area, now it's probably just going to be something that we're going to be able to do on the Strip or maybe Fremont Street. I've not actually ever been up to Fremont Street, so I wouldn't mind going to see what that's about. But Wednesday, October 19, if you're in the area, I would love to have a meetup. You just need to email me, and or otherwise contact me on the Facebook group or whatever. Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com is the email. And you're welcome to email me, and we can see about establishing a time and location to where we would actually meet up and go out and capture some images and maybe, grab a bite to eat too, because I'll be done with my conference and we'll just be able to meet up in the evening. So we'll need to find a place to grab a bite as well. So anyway, there's that. All right, let's wrap this stuff up. We're going to wrap it up with our dose of inspiration. And it comes from Ecclesiastes 10:10 in the New Living Translation. It says, "Using a dull axe requires great strength, so sharpen the blade." That's the value of wisdom. It helps you succeed. The biggest reason I love this and the way it applies to what we got going on here with this conversation in the Ketchikan area is, I love that. A dull axe requires great strength, so sharpen the blade. Well, that was part of what I was feeling like when I first got started shooting, and why I needed to just, really what it was about taking the sharp blade out of the sheath so that I could use a sharp blade and not have such a difficult time. So I guess for specifically the analogy that I might be using is not that I was necessarily sharpening my blade, but I was allowing myself to pull out or to otherwise use the sharp blade rather than using the dull blade. And it helps you succeed. And I do believe that many of these images that I photographed are definitely successful. And it's because of the years of experience, the many times I've gone out in the past and just constantly repeating that, getting lots of feedback, getting lots of valuable advice over the years from multiple people, that it turns into something. And then just, of course, again, studying and practicing and concentrating on these things, it really helps advance your photography, and it really helps when you're trying to make some amazing pictures and to have a greater impact. That just getting that sharpened blade, as it were. All right, then the next one I mentioned, in our dose of inspiration, I would talk more about that. The idea, sort of along the lines of what I was thinking when I was photographing those roots that were still shaped around the stump that is no longer there or is decaying. And I have a quote from John Muir. And here's the quote. "I used to envy the father of our race, dwelling as he did in contact with the new-made fields and plants of Eden. But I do so no more, because I have discovered that I also live in creation's dawn. The morning stars still sing together, and the world, not yet half made, becomes more beautiful every day." This is exactly the mindset I think I was looking at when I was looking at that root and trying to photograph that root. And I was taking it myself a little bit further when I was photographing that root. And I was also not only thinking about how this world becomes more beautiful every day, and not only thinking about how amazing it would have been to see the Garden of Eden and just how mind-blowingly beautiful that would be, I'm sure, of course. But the way that those roots were fashioned, the way that those roots were formed, really spoke to me about me as an individual and you as an individual, and how unique those roots are. Those roots don't look like any other roots you'll ever see on this planet. And they don't look like any roots you'll see probably anywhere else in the universe. Who knows what else is out there? But that goes the same for you, and it goes the same for me. And we each have our own unique perspective, our own unique abilities, our own unique identity of who we are, what it means for us to be in this thing called photography, to involve ourselves in photography. And that just, for some reason, when I was there, it just moved me. I was like, I have to make a picture of this. This is chaotic. This is a hot mess of tree roots, but it is so special and it's so unique and it's so beautiful in its chaos, in its uniqueness. That's what makes it beautiful. Anyway, so just to tie that all up and to tie that off, those are the inspirations. Those are the thoughts I wish to leave you with today. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an amazing journey to relate these stories, to put together all these images, to process everything, and to bring it to this point. If you do have questions, thoughts, comments, ideas, please do reach out. I'm always happy to hear from you and to understand how this is important to you, or maybe there's other things that you want to hear about too, and you have some suggestions. Let me know. Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com, or again, just put something in the Facebook group and let's have a conversation there. All right, we will see you next time. The next episode is going to be all about processing fog images. I had a request a little while ago, and it's coming. So that will be the next episode. And I'm very much looking forward to that, because there's just so much to get into there that'll be awesome. All right, we'll see you then. Until next time, God bless and happy shooting.